Welcome back to Inside Vietnam. I'm glad you're here. Most of the time, when someone sits down to tell me their story for this channel, there's a particular look they get about 5 minutes in. A kind of controlled grimace, like a man who's just remembered something he'd prefer to have forgotten. We've covered a lot of ground on this channel, and most of it has been hard to hear. This one is different. Declan Murtaugh is 61 years old. He's from Limerick, in Ireland. He spent 35 years as a professional chef, hotels, pub kitchens, the kind of work that builds a man's identity so thoroughly he doesn't notice until it's gone. He's been living in Da Nang for just over 2 years now, on a combined pension of roughly $1,400 a month. His savings are almost exactly where they were when he arrived. This isn't a story about losing everything. But I'd ask you not to switch off just yet, because Declan's story is honest in ways that most retirement and Vietnam content simply isn't. The parts he talks about that went wrong are the parts nobody puts in a thumbnail. He's going to tell you how he did it. And more importantly, he's going to tell you what it actually cost. Here's Declan. Right. So, the kitchen. That's where this starts, really. Not Vietnam, not Da Nang, not any of that. It starts at 5:30 in the morning in a hotel kitchen in Limerick, and it starts 35 years before any of this story matters. I want you to understand something about kitchen work before I tell you anything else, because it shapes everything that comes after. In a kitchen, being unreachable is professional. Being unreachable is, in fact, a kind of virtue. You don't take personal calls during service. You don't leave early for your daughter's school play. You don't nip out to pick up your son from football. The work is total, and the work rewards that totality. And for a long time, I mistook that reward for something it wasn't. I thought it meant I was serious. What it actually meant was that I'd made a choice, over and over, without ever deciding to make it. I was good. I want to say that plainly, not to boast. I was genuinely good at the work. Banquets for 300, no drama. Supplier negotiations that kept the margins where they needed to be. I could look at a kitchen rota on a Tuesday and know by Wednesday what was going to go wrong on Saturday, and fix it before it happened. That kind of good. The kind that gets you early starts and late finishes, and a certain reputation among people who care about those things. My wife, Siobhan, cared about different things. We weren't a disaster, herself and me. I want to be precise about this because people expect a disaster. There was no catastrophic row, no one unforgivable thing. What there was, over about 15 years, was a long cooling. Like a kitchen after service, everything that was hot slowly coming down to room temperature. By the time Kieran was in secondary school, we were two people sharing a house in Castletroy and doing it politely. She was a good woman. She deserved more availability than I had to offer, and I think we both knew it, and neither of us said it for years too long. We sorted out the house when we separated. No great bitterness to it, which was almost worse in a way. You expect the bitterness to mean something mattered. Karen's in Cork now. Works in insurance. Aoifes in London. Does something in marketing that I couldn't describe accurately. They're both fine. They're both, I think, people I'd like very much if I'd spent more time with them while they were becoming people. That's the thing I live with, isn't it? I retired at 59. The hotel had changed hands. The new management wanted different ideas, and they made the offer at the right moment. I took the pension, I took what was left of my share of the Castletroy house, and I sat down in a 4-bedroom place that had been built for a family that had, in all meaningful ways, already relocated. 3 months of that. You'd think 3 months would be nothing. 35 years of wishing for a quiet morning, and then you have them, unlimited, and what you discover is that quiet mornings were only pleasant as a contrast to everything else. Remove the everything else, and the quiet morning is just a room. I kept waking at 5:30. Body didn't get the memo. I'd be up, standing in the kitchen of this big empty house, kettle on, and there was nowhere to be, and nothing that needed doing, and nobody who required anything from me. I'd built my entire sense of myself around being required, and then I wasn't required. And the man who was left over was, I don't know, unfamiliar. I tried the golf. Lasted 3 weeks. I tried the local GAA club, went to a few matches, sat with men I half knew, talking about things I had no interest in. I started reading, which was fine. But you can only read for so long before you're just avoiding looking at the room. I sent Kiara a voice message in October 2021. Nothing dramatic, just saying I was around. If he wanted to grab a coffee, I'd drive to Cork, whatever suited him. He's busy. I know he's busy. It sat on delivered for 11 days. I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I'm telling you it because it explains what I was doing at 2 in the morning with a laptop and a whiskey, watching a fella from Bristol wander around a market in Vietnam paying 40,000 dong for a bowl of soup. 40,000 dong. At the time, that was roughly €1.40. The bowl, from what one could see on the screen, was enormous. The broth was the color of something I had been proud to put out. I watched for a while. Then I watched something else. Then I went to bed and got up at 5:30 the next morning and watched some more. I want to be clear that this was not a romantic impulse. I wasn't looking at Vietnam and thinking about warm evenings and a fresh start. I am not that kind of man, and I know it. What I was doing was running a food cost in my head. My pension, the state pension, plus what I'd accrued from the hotel trade, came to about €1,380 a month. In Ireland, that money did not go far. In Limerick, it covered the bills, the groceries, the car insurance, the broadband, and not a great deal else. There was no surplus, there was no trip. There was the house and the pension and the 4-bedroom quiet. In Vietnam, apparently, a man could eat well for €1.40. That's all it was at the start. Just arithmetic. So I watched for about 3 weeks before I did anything else. That's not impatience. That's actually quite restrained for me. I've been known to research a new supplier for 6 weeks before returning a phone call. But the YouTube algorithm, once it has you, is fairly relentless. And by the second week, I had a reasonable working picture of what Da Nang cost in 2021, what it had cost in 2018, and the direction of travel. I also had a reasonable picture of what could go wrong, because I watched those too. There's a whole genre of them, if you haven't found it yet. Men sitting in front of cameras, usually somewhere in Southeast Asia, telling you how they lost 30, 50, 80,000 euros to a woman they met on an app. I watched about 15 of those, not to be frightened off. To understand the variables. In a kitchen, you learn early that the most dangerous thing isn't a sharp knife or a hot pan. It's a process you don't understand. Once you understand the failure points, you can work around them. So I watched the disaster videos the way I'd read a kitchen incident report. What went wrong, at which stage, and why? The why was usually the same. Too fast. Too trusting. Too far gone emotionally before the money started moving. Right. Filed that away. I found a Facebook group for Da Nang expats and read 6 months of posts without joining the conversation once. That's another kitchen habit. When you arrive somewhere new, you listen before you speak. The group was a reasonable cross-section. Men complaining about visa paperwork, men recommending dentists, men asking where to buy decent olive oil, men having the same argument about which neighborhood was best that they'd clearly been having for 3 years. Useful. I read the whole thing. Thailand. I'd already dismissed. No disrespect to anyone who loves it, but from what I could see, what Thailand was selling a certain type of man in his late 50s was the opportunity to purchase a version of himself that was 20 years younger and considerably more interesting. Too many fellas on holiday from themselves. I wanted somewhere that wasn't performing for me. Portugal came up a few times in my research. Friends had mentioned it. The weather is grand. The food is decent. The weather is grand. The food is decent. But there's a very large number of Irish people in the Algarve now, all of whom have discovered that the best way to leave Ireland behind is to move somewhere sunny and live beside other Irish people. I could have done that. I could have sat in a bar in Cascais arguing about the housing crisis with a man from Roscommon. I didn't see the improvement. Malaysia seemed sensible on paper. The MM2H visa was specifically designed for retirees. English was widely spoken. Costs were low. But the government had tightened the MM2H requirements significantly around that time, pushed the financial threshold up sharply, and the forums were full of people stuck in uncertainty. I didn't need uncertainty. I had plenty of that in Castle Troy. Vietnam had something I couldn't name precisely at first. When I read the posts and watched the videos, the people who seemed to have made something of it there, the ones who weren't in the disaster genre, they talked about Vietnam the way I'd talk about a kitchen that runs on its own terms. It had its own logic. its own hierarchy, its own rhythms, its own ways of doing things that weren't going to change for your convenience. You either respected that or you had a bad time. I understood that kind of place. I'd worked in a few of them, so I ran the numbers properly, not optimistically, accurately. I found rental figures from multiple sources, cross-referenced them, took the average, and added 15%, because online figures are always the good case scenario. I found current health insurance quotes for a 60-year-old Irish national in Southeast Asia. I looked at food costs, transport costs, the price of a Kai Fiswa from a street vendor versus a coffee from somewhere that catered to tourists. I built a spreadsheet, 3 columns, minimum, realistic, comfortable. The realistic column came out at about €950 a month. My pension was €1380. The surplus was €430 every single month, going nowhere but the credit union in Limerick. The first time I saw that figure clearly, I sat with it for a while. I booked a serviced apartment in Onthrong for 6 weeks. Paid the deposit on a Wednesday, told nobody, and felt, for the first time in about 2 years, that I'd made a decision rather than had one made for me. I should mention, briefly, because I'll come back to it later, that I arrived on a standard e-visa, 90 days, single entry at the time. I was aware this wasn't a long-term solution. I wasn't thinking about long-term yet. I was thinking about 6 weeks. The flight from Dublin to Da Nang goes through somewhere. I went through Dublin to Da Nang goes through somewhere. I went through Doha, and takes the better part of a day. I landed in the morning, and the heat hit me coming through the doors of the terminal, the way an oven hits you when you open it too fast. I was completely fine with it. 35 years of standing next to commercial ranges, your tolerance for ambient heat becomes fairly robust. The traffic nearly finished me, though. Nothing prepares you for the motorbikes. It's not chaotic exactly. There's a logic to it. I worked that out eventually, but the logic is invisible to a man who's spent his life where traffic obeys lights and markings. The first time I tried to cross Nguyen Vern Lynn Street, I stood on the curb for about 4 minutes trying to find a gap. There's no gap. You walk into it steadily, and they go around you. Someone told me that later. Would have been useful to know at the time. I had a plan for the mornings, because without a plan I'd learned what mornings became. Day 3, I found the wet market near A Chong. It's a proper working market near Angement, not a tourist arrangement. The kind of place where the vendors know each other and prices are settled by the hour and nobody's performing anything for anybody. I went in looking for fish. And here's the thing. I knew what I was looking at. I could read the catch the way you read an invoice, quality, freshness, what it should cost relative to what they were quoting. There was a stall with mackerel that was good, genuinely good, eyes clear, skin tight, and the woman quoted me a price that was, politely, optimistic. I indicated, without any Vietnamese, that I thought this was the case. She came down. We arrived somewhere reasonable. I bought the fish. I stood outside the market with a bag of mackerel and the smell of the place, lemongrass, raw fish, something frying somewhere, incense from a small altar near the entrance, and something settled in me that had been unsettled for 2 years. I can't explain it better than that. The work had always been the anchor. Standing in that market, understanding the fish, understanding approximately what it should cost, I was briefly not a retired man with nobody to cook for. I was just a chef at a market. I knew what I was doing. That evening, I made the mackerel simply, just pan-fried with some ginger I'd found, sat at the small table in the service department, and ate it looking out at a street where 3 Honda Waves and a delivery scooter had somehow all stopped to argue amiably in the middle of the road. It was, I thought, a reasonable start. Within the first 10 days, I also got a message on Zalo, the messaging app everyone uses here, not WhatsApp, from a woman whose profile photo was almost certainly taken by a professional photographer and whose English was fluent and whose opening message referenced my interest in Vietnamese culture and cuisine. I had been in Da Nang for 8 days. I had no idea how she'd found me. The message was well crafted. Warm, curious, specific in the right ways. I didn't respond. I just noted it. The disaster videos had been thorough on this point. By week 2, I'd settled into the routine I'd intended. Market in the morning, cook, walk along the path near Maki Beach. In the early evening when the heat began to drop, read. On Thursday evenings, there was an informal expat gathering at a bar called Somewhere with Dragon, in the name on a street near the beach. A dozen or so men, mostly older, mostly Western, mostly with the look of people who'd made a decision they were still deciding whether to explain. I started attending, not for company particularly, but because a kitchen runs on information, and I'd learned that information lives in rooms like that if you know how to listen to a noisy room. What I heard over the following weeks would shape everything that came after. But I'll get to that. The coffee shop where I'd settled into a morning routine was a small place on a Humaf Tun Pru, maybe 8 tables, a ceiling fan that made more noise than difference, and a woman in her 60s who made kai pi soin that was dense enough to stand a spoon in. I had no idea what it was called. There was no sign I could read. I just called it the coffee place and went every morning at 7, and by the 3rd week, the woman had my order ready when she saw me turn off the main road. That's where I met Min. He was there one morning, well-dressed in the way that suggests deliberate effort rather than habit. Pressed shirt, clean shoes, a watch that caught the light. Good English, which he deployed immediately and well. Curious about me in a way that felt flattering at the time, though I've thought about it since. He asked what had brought me to Da Nang, whether I'd considered other cities, what I thought of the food. He had opinions on food that were sharp and informed, which I respected. We talked for nearly an hour that first morning, and it was, genuinely, a good conversation. This repeated, not every day, but often enough. Min was good company. He explained things I'd been wondering about. The logic of how markets price things at different times of day. The difference between how northern and southern Vietnamese cooked the same dishes. What the festival decorations I'd been seeing on the way to Siem Tra Peninsula were actually about. He was a useful person to know. I appreciated that. A kitchen has its gossips too, and it has its chancers. You learn, after enough years, to sort signal from noise. I hadn't decided yet which Min was. In week 4, he mentioned a friend. A friend with an interest in a beachfront property who was looking for a silent partner. A foreign partner, specifically, for reasons he was somewhat vague about, though I could speculate. Small initial stake, he said. $30,000. The return on paper was reasonable. The whole thing was, he said, entirely above board. I let him finish. Kitchen habit, you let the person finish. Then I told him I wasn't in a position to make that kind of investment. Thanked him for thinking of me, and said I hoped the coffee was as good wherever his friend found his partner. Min's manner shifted. Not dramatically. Just a degree or two of warmth removed, permanently. We were still civil when we saw each other after that, but the hour-long conversations were done. He had somewhere to be. I wasn't angry about it. It would be dishonest to pretend I wasn't a bit sad, because the conversations had been good, I liked him. But the arithmetic of it was clear enough. He'd needed 3 weeks to build sufficient goodwill for the ask. That's a professional timeline. I wasn't the first person he'd sat across from in that coffee shop, and I wouldn't be the last. The other thing that happened in those same weeks, completely separately, completely differently, was the mackerel woman at the market. This was a Sunday, maybe the 6th or 7th week. I'd been going to the An Tong wet market often enough by then that a few of the stalls knew me, or knew my habits anyway. There was a fish vendor I liked, good KFU, fair prices once we'd established an understanding, and on this particular morning he was asking me 80,000 dong for 2 pieces that were fine, fresh enough, but not 80,000 dong worth of fresh. I knew the fish. I indicated this in the way you indicate it without a common language, which is mostly eyebrows and a slight tilt of the head toward a competing stall. A woman nearby laughed. Not at me, at the situation. She said something in Vietnamese to the vendor, and his response was apparently quite funny because she laughed again. And then she looked at me and said in English, "He says you know too much for a tourist." She wasn't hovering. She had her own basket. She was buying morning groceries, the same as me, and had translated the exchange the way you'd hold a door open, briefly, as a matter of course, with no expectation of anything in return. Her name was Lin. She was 47. She'd been divorced for 6 years and worked as a bookkeeper for a logistics firm near the Tian Son Bridge. I know all of that now. At the time, I knew only that she'd translated one sentence and then turned back to examine a pile of morning glory, with the focused attention of a person who had better things to do then make conversation with a foreign man at a fish stall. I bought the mackerel at a price we both found acceptable. We crossed paths at the market again the following Sunday, and the one after. The third time we had coffee nearby, her suggestion, which surprised me, at a plastic stool place on the corner that served banh mi with the coffee if you wanted it. I wanted it. The conversation was practical. She asked what I cooked. I said most things. She said her Vietnamese was better than my French technique, probably. I said that was almost certainly true. After that, dinner once. Then again. I want to be direct with you about what made this different. Because I'd been sitting in the Dragon Bar for 2 months listening to men tell their stories, and I understood the pattern well enough by then. The pattern involves a particular performance of need. Vulnerability deployed carefully, at intervals to invite investment, emotional first, then financial, the two things being difficult to separate once you're far enough in. I'd watch for it. I watched for it. I watched for it with Lynn from the first coffee. She didn't ask me anything about my finances, not once. She didn't mention her son in a way that implied I should have feelings about his welfare. She mentioned Coe the way you'd mention any fact about your life. He was 16, interested in engineering, was being difficult about studying for his exams, which she found exasperating but also faintly impressive. She wasn't presenting him. She was just talking. She wasn't performing vulnerability. She wasn't building anything that I could see. She wasn't building anything that I could see. She was just present in the conversation, interested in what I said, disagreeing when she disagreed, which was fairly often and always specifically. The first time I made pho for her at my apartment, she told me my broth was good, but my noodles were 15 seconds overcooked. She was right. I knew it when I put them in the bowl, but 1/500 got distracted by the garnish plate. This annoyed me, which meant I was paying attention. Here's the thing I noticed around the 8th or 9th week of knowing her. I'd been waiting for the ask, watching for the shift in atmosphere that preceded it, the way I'd watched Min's conversation shift in tone before he mentioned his friend. The shift never came. And after a while, the absence of the shift started to make me more suspicious, not less. Because I'd heard at the Dragon Bar about women so skilled at this that they could wait months, a year, before the pattern revealed itself. You can't tell a kitchen from a show kitchen until you've seen it under real pressure. A show kitchen looks perfect. Everything is clean and staged, and the mise en place is immaculate. Put 200 covers through it, and you find out very quickly what's real and what's decoration. Patience is the heat. I decided I had enough patience. We kept seeing each other. Once, sometimes twice a week. Dinners mostly. Occasionally a walk along the path by my quay in the evening when the heat came down and the city softened a little. She did not ask me for anything. I remained, professionally, suspicious. But I was enjoying myself, it had been a while. I'll say that much. By July 2022, 4 months in, I decided to stop paying the service department rate and find something permanent, or permanent enough. The service place was costing me around 15,000 VND a month, about 50-50, which was fine for a scout but wasteful as a long-term arrangement. I'd identified the neighborhood I wanted. I knew the rough going rate, and I'd been told firmly by 2 different men at the Dragon Bar that going through an agency added at minimum 10% to your rent and 0% to your actual welfare. I found Mr. Hung through a notice at the wet market, handwritten in Vietnamese, which a vendor I knew by then translated for me as 1 bedroom, quiet, near beach. I went to look at it the following morning. Mr. Fied for me. Designus. Huang was a retired schoolteacher in his early 70s, slight, very courteous, with the kind of precise English that comes from having taught it, rather than having spoken it socially. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of his family building, 3 blocks from the beach, 1 block from a good pho place I'd been meaning to try properly. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a balcony just large enough for 2 chairs if neither person was large. The previous tenant had left a small altar shelf near the door with a dried orange on it. I left it there. We negotiated at his kitchen table over tea. His opening position was 9 million BND a month, which was not unreasonable for the location, but it was the posted rate, and I was not a posted rate kind of person. I explained that I was looking for a minimum 12-month arrangement, possibly longer, and that I was happy to pay 6 months up front in exchange for a rate of 799 roughly, 2799, roughly 270, and a written lease with first refusal rights on renewal. I had this prepared on my phone, translated into Vietnamese, which I think surprised him. He looked at the translation for a moment. Then he said, in English, that I was clearly not a tourist. I said I'd spent 35 years buying fish and produce from people who were perfectly nice and also trying to charge me what they could get away with. And I'd learned that the best outcome for everybody was usually reached by being direct about what you wanted. He found this, apparently, acceptable. We agreed on the terms. I had a Vietnamese-speaking acquaintance from the expat bar review the lease before I signed it. The acquaintance said it was straightforward and that I should stop being so suspicious. I told him that was the most Irish advice I'd received since leaving Ireland. So, apartment, 79,000 VND a month, 270. Health insurance through an expat provider, which I'd sorted before I left Limerick, 85 a month. Food, almost nothing, because I cooked and I bought at market prices and I knew how to make something decent from very little. Transport, I walked most places, occasionally used Grab for longer distances. I added a generous, miscellaneous buffer of 150 a month for the unexpected. Total monthly outlay, approximately $960. Monthly pension income, monthly surplus, around $40.90, going directly to the credit union in Limerick each month without ceremony. That's the number that mattered. 420 euros a month, going home, accumulating, untouched. That was the system working. Not exciting, not the stuff of YouTube thumbnails. But it held. Meanwhile, Lynn and I kept seeing each other, and I kept watching for the thing I was expecting to see. In September, a second Zalo message arrived, different woman, more elaborate this time. She'd seen my name on a Da Nang expat Facebook group, apparently. Described herself as a teacher, 30s, interested in cultural exchange with Europeans. The message was 3 paragraphs long, warm in all the right ways, specific enough to seem genuine. It was, honestly, better crafted than the first one. Someone had put thought into it. I showed it to Lynn the next time I saw her. Partly as a test of her reaction, partly because transparency seemed like useful information about where we stood. She read it on my phone, said something quietly in Vietnamese that I suspect was not complimentary, then handed it back and told me the phrasing in the second paragraph was a direct translation from a template that circulated on certain Vietnamese forums. She knew this because a cousin of hers had received almost the identical message from a man in Germany. She wasn't outraged on my behalf. She wasn't performing protectiveness. She was just, accurate, clinical, almost. It told me something I filed away alongside everything else I'd been filing. The Dragon Bar, those months, was an education in parallel. A British man named Gary had lost 40,000 sterling. He was very specific about the sterling. Which I understood, on a restaurant venture and high-end partner, had been his girlfriend of 8 months. Her name was on the lease. Her cousin ran the kitchen, and when the relationship ended, so did his access to the accounts. Another man, Dutch, 63, had a girlfriend whose mother had experienced 3 distinct medical emergencies in 14 months, each requiring cash, each resolved satisfactorily until the next one appeared. He described this, not with anger, but with a kind of exhausted wonder at the regularity of it. Like a subscription service, he said, which I thought was very Dutch. I bought rounds. I asked questions. I listened. These men weren't stupid. That was the thing that struck me most. They were ordinary, mostly decent, sometimes lonely. The loneliness was the variable. It was the thing that had shortened their timelines and softened their judgment, and made them willing to believe that the ask was reasonable and the relationship was real and the next emergency would be the last one. I thought about that a lot, those evenings. November. 8 months in, roughly. Lynn and I were having dinner at a Cam Tam place near the Han River, the good one on Tran Phu with the charcoal grilled pork that came out still making noise. And in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely, she mentioned that Khoi needed a new laptop for school. His current one was 5 years old and no longer adequate for what the school was requiring. She said this the way you mention a problem to someone you trust, not a request, not a setup, just information, shared plainly. I registered it immediately as a test. Mine, of her, not hers of me. I asked how much laptops cost in Da Nang, what spec the school required. She told me. Around 8 to 10 million VND. $2,370 for something adequate. I said, I see. She said yes. We continued the conversation about whatever we'd been discussing before. I did not offer the money. I wanted to. That was the honest truth of it. I had the money. The amount was nothing against my budget, and some part of me wanted to be the person who'd said yes. I recognized that wanting for exactly what it was, the desire to be needed, the thing I'd built my entire identity around for 35 years. It was the most expensive impulse I'd ever had to suppress, and it cost me nothing but restraint. 2 weeks later, Lynn mentioned in passing that Koei had the new laptop. She'd bought it at a shop near Yujing University. It had cost 8,500,000 VND. She seemed mildly pleased about the price. She had not asked me. She had never asked me. The amount went on her credit card, January 2023. The amount went on her credit card, January 2023. Relationship real, in the way that real things are slightly unglamorous and sometimes irritating, and occasionally, unexpectedly, warm, in a way that catches you off guard, at a charcoal grill on Trenpu. My lease ran through to July 2024. My budget was holding. And Lynn, who I hadn't been sure about for 8 methodical months, had not asked me for a single thing. I was still watching. But I was beginning to think I understood what I was looking at. Titi came at the end of January 2023, and Da Nang changed overnight. The city had been loud before. It's always loud. The construction, and the motorbikes, and the occasional karaoke bleeding through someone's wall at 11 at night. But in the week before Tind, it became a different kind of loud. Strings of lights appeared on every building on Trenfo. The wet market tripled its flower stalls. Hung Mai, yellow apricot blossoms, the southern Tind flower, went up outside every shop and restaurant and family home until the whole neighborhood looked like it was trying to say something to the sky. I found it genuinely beautiful, which I mentioned because I'm not given to saying things like that. Lynn went to Guangnan Province on the 21st of January to spend the holiday with her parents. She did not invite me, and I had not expected to be invited. We'd been whatever we were for 9 months, not undefined exactly, but not ceremonially defined either, and it seemed reasonable that a first meeting with her family would require more preparation than I'd had time to do. She brought me back a small jar from her mother. Mimim Tom, homemade shrimp paste, the strong kind. The kind you acquire a taste for, or you don't. She handed it to me at the market the Sunday after Tai, with no explanation beyond saying her mother had sent it. I thanked her and brought it home, and looked at it for a while on the kitchen counter. I'd done some reading about Tai in the weeks before she left. The lazai, lucky money envelopes given to children and elders. The obligation to clear debts before the new year. To arrive at family gatherings with gifts appropriate to your relationship to the household. The particular significance of what you bring and how much, because in Vietnamese family culture these things are not invisible. I asked Lynn directly what the correct expectation would be if a boyfriend were to visit a girlfriend's parents at T.Chi. She told me without hesitation, a modest envelope for the parents, a small gift for the household, nothing extravagant. She gave me a figure, 500,000 VND per person, roughly 18 each, maybe a box of good bane from a reputable shop, nothing more. She said a man who arrived with too much would create discomfort, not gratitude. Face works in both directions. I stored this information carefully, the way you store the specific temperature at which a sauce will break. In March, she mentioned, almost in passing, that her father had been having some health trouble. Nothing serious, she said, a blood pressure issue that the doctor in Hai'an was managing. She mentioned it on a Tuesday over coffee, the way you'd mention any minor household inconvenience. She did not ask me for anything. I said I was sorry to hear it and asked if there was anything she needed. She said no. I accepted that, because she had given me no reason not to, and then I checked in a week later. She said the doctor was satisfied. The conversation ended there. I've thought about how to describe that exchange, because it's harder to convey than it sounds. The men at the Dragon Bar, the ones who'd been through the medical emergency pattern, described a very specific escalation. Initial mention, followed by a dollar figure, followed by another emergency a few months later, followed by another. The shape of it was consistent. What Lynn's conversation had was a different shape entirely. She told me because I was someone she told things to. She didn't tell me because she was constructing something. That distinction is, well, You either see it or you don't. I saw it. I also remained alert to the possibility that I was seeing what I wanted to see, because I was aware enough by then to know that's a risk too. In May, she asked if I'd like to come to Quang Nam for a weekend to meet her parents. I said yes, and then I treated the preparation the way I'd treat prep for an important service. I read everything I could find about visiting a Vietnamese family as a foreign partner. I asked Lynn specifically what to bring, what not to bring, what to expect over meals, whether there were topics to avoid. She answered each question directly, which I appreciated. I prepared a basket, a good arrangement of fruit, dragon fruit, mangoes, a bunch of lychee, a box of ban pia from a shop on Laduan that Lynn had recommended, and 2 small envelopes. 500,000 VND each. He'd told me. No more. No improvising on the day. The house was about 30 kilometers inland from Da Nang. A 20-minute drive past rice paddies and workshop buildings and a small Catholic church with a rusted, corrugated roof. The family home was modest and well-kept, with a garden that had clearly been worked for decades, papaya trees, a vegetable patch, a small altar near the entrance with fresh incense and a cup of water, and a photograph of someone I didn't ask about. Her parents were in their late 60s. Her father, Mr. Kong, was a retired civil servant who spoke no English but had decided, apparently, to find me amusing. He pointed at things during dinner and said their Vietnamese names, slowly, watching to see if I repeated them. I repeated them. I mangled one, the word for chopsticks, boye, which I produced with entirely the wrong tone so that it meant something different, though nobody told me what. And he found this very funny, corrected me gently, made me say it again. I said it again. He nodded. It was, somehow, an entire conversation. He nodded. It was, somehow, an entire conversation. Her mother fed me enough for 3 men. I ate it all, because I know what it means when someone feeds you without stopping. It was the second day when Tuan arrived. He was Lynn's younger brother, 38, worked construction projects around the province. He was cordial enough at first, curious about me in the way people are curious when they're also calculating something. His English was limited, and our communication went through Lynn, which I noted as a complicating factor. At some point in the afternoon, when Lynn's parents were resting and the 3 of us were sitting in the garden with a pot of tea, Tuan said something to Lynn at length. Her expression said something to Lynn at length. She said something brief in return. He said something else. She said something shorter. That evening, in the car back to Da Nang, I asked what had been said. She told me plainly. Tuan had said that a Westerner who visited like this, who came to meet the family and brought gifts correctly and sat through 3 hours of dinner, usually had intentions that included supporting the family financially. That a man in my position, with a foreign pension, could reasonably be expected to contribute to certain things. Her father's medical costs, perhaps a repair to the roof. These were not demands, she was careful to say. They were his expectations of what the situation implied. She had told him, in brief, that this was not how she operated, and that if she needed anything from me, she was capable of asking for it herself. I was quiet for a moment. Then I asked her directly what her own expectations were. She said, I am not my brother. If I need something from you, I will tell you. I am not telling you anything now. And then she looked out the window at the motorbikes passing on the highway, and said nothing further on the subject. I want to say something to you directly here, because this is the moment the video is really about, I think. A Vietnamese woman who translates her own family's worst moment and hands it to you straight is either the most honest person you've met or the best actress you've encountered. I decided to find out which one. I almost believed her immediately. The restraint of not believing her immediately was the hardest thing I'd done in Vietnam. But I was a chef. You taste before you serve. 18 months in. Savings at approximately 88,000. A small drift from exchange rate movement, nothing else. Leaseholding. System intact. Tuan's comment filed, not forgotten, being monitored. The question of what came next was about to get complicated in ways that had nothing to do with Lynn. Right. Here's where I tell you the parts that don't go in the thumbnail. Every retirement in Vietnam video has a version of the same sequence. Man arrives, man is charmed, man discovers the cost of living, man reveals the monthly figure, man grins into the camera from a nice cafe with a decent coffee. And it's all true, I'm not disputing any of it. But there's a section of the story those videos tend to skip, and it's the section one want to spend some time on, Because if you're watching this from a house somewhere in the north of England or the outskirts of Dublin or suburb of Auckland, you deserve to know what the full picture looks like. The visa situation first, because it's the thing I'd deferred longest, and it was catching up with me. I've been running on touristy visas since March 2022. At the time of my first entry, Irish nationals got 90 days, single entry. Irish nationals got 90 days, single entry. Vietnam updated the rules during 2023. 90-day multiple entry became available, which made life considerably less complicated logistically. But the fundamental problem hadn't changed. I was 61 years old. I had no employer in Vietnam, so no work permit. I had no registered company, so no business visa. I wasn't married to a Vietnamese national, so no spousal exemption. What I had was a tourist visa that I renewed by crossing into Cambodia for a day every 3 months, which worked, but which also meant that my continued presence in the country depended entirely on a border official's discretion, and the continued goodwill of immigration policy I had no control over. If you're looking at this from outside, you might reasonably ask why I hadn't sorted it sooner. The honest answer is that I'd been prioritizing the things I could control: the budget, the apartment, the relationship, and treating the visa as a problem I'd solve when it became urgent. It was now becoming urgent. I looked into it properly in late 2023. The options, as I understood them, the DT Investor Visa, which requires you to register a company and demonstrate significant capital, bureaucratically complex and not cheap. The marriage route, which I want to be very clear I was not going to pursue because of a visa, and Lynn would have found the suggestion offensive, rightly. And the ongoing tourist arrangement with its exits and its uncertainty. There are immigration consultants in Da Nang who will, for a fee, walk you through the options in detail. I paid 12 million VND, about 74, for an hour of their time and left with a clear picture and no obvious solution. The visa situation is the one thing about Da Nang that keeps me awake at night more than anything else, more than the budget, more than Kieran's messages. Because everything else I've described to you, the system, the apartment, the surplus, it all depends on being allowed to stay. And that, currently, is not guaranteed. I want you to know that going in, if you're considering this, let me update you on those. My rent had stayed locked at 70 million D. That was the value of the written lease. But the market had moved around it. Food costs at the wet market had risen 15 to 20% over 2 years, which I was tracking because tracking costs is what I do. My health insurance premium increased at renewal in late 2023, up about €12 a month, which sounds small but is a direction I'm watching. And in October 2023, I needed a crown. 1 tooth, 1 crown, 1 private dental clinic near the university. 8 million VND. About 290. Entirely unavoidable. Not ruinous. But the first unbudgeted expenditure of any significance since I'd arrived. A budget isn't a photograph. It's a temperature you have to keep checking. I check it every month, the same way I used to do the food cost review at the end of service. My current monthly outlay sits at approximately $1,000 SETI. The surplus is narrower than it was, somewhere between $1,000 The surplus is narrower than it was, somewhere between $1,030 rather than $1,200. Now $1,000 in November. 2N, in November 2023, Lynn told me a construction project had stalled. Wages had been delayed. He had a gap he couldn't cover. She told me because she tells me things, and because he had asked her whether I might be able to help. She was precise about the framing. He had asked her to ask me. She was not asking me. She was telling me he'd asked, and telling me clearly that she did not expect me to do anything about it, and that she would sort it herself. This was the laptop test again. Same structure, higher stakes. Around 8 million VND, about 290, was the figure involved. Not catastrophic. The kind of amount that, for a man who wanted badly to be generous, would feel almost embarrassingly easy to provide. I expressed sympathy. I said it sounded stressful. I asked how she was handling it. I did not offer money. She didn't ask me to. The situation resolved, I don't know how, and I didn't ask, within about 3 weeks. Tushin found another solution somewhere. What changed after that was small but real. There was a slight easing in Lynn that I noticed, but didn't remark on. Something clarified between us, I think, in the way that things clarify when a situation that could have gone badly doesn't. She'd held the line with her brother, I'd held the line with my wallet, and neither of us had made it awkward for the other. You build something on that, quietly, without naming it. And now I want to tell you the parts that genuinely don't go in the thumbnail, because I'd be doing you a disservice if I left them out. I don't speak Vietnamese. Properly, I mean. I have the market Vietnamese. I can negotiate a fish price and order coffee and tell a Grab driver where I'm going. Beyond that, I'm functionally mute in this city. That's a loneliness of its own kind that you don't notice until a moment when you'd like to say something real to someone and you don't have the language for it. I have 3 people in Da Nang I call friends. Actual friends, not acquaintances. 3. One is an Australian man who came here in 29 and stayed for reasons he describes as complicated. One is a Vietnamese man who runs the pho place near my apartment and has, over 2 years, taught me things about broth I'm still using. And there's Lynn, who is in a category of her own. 3 people. That's the honest count. I haven't spoken to Aoi Fei since Christmas 2022. I'm aware of this the same way you're aware of a tooth before it starts to hurt, as a dull background fact that hasn't demanded attention yet. Kairan sent me a message in February 2024. Brief, civil. He hoped I was well. I was. I said so. That was all of it. I'm not telling you this because I want sympathy. I'm telling you because any man who tells you that expat retirement in Vietnam is a cure for loneliness is either very lucky or not being straight with you. The loneliness didn't go away. It changed shape. That's not nothing. But it's not the same as it going away. What Declan describes in this part of his story is what most cost of living in Vietnam content simply leaves out. The real complications are quieter than betrayal and harder to fix than a budget. Than a budget line. He's going to bring this home now. Here's the last part of what he has to tell you. So, here we are. March 2024. I want to tell you where things stand, concretely, because that's what this kind of video is actually for. The apartment lease is renewed through to mid-2025, same terms, same Mr. Hung, same rate. He offered me the renewal in January, without me having to ask, which I took as a kind of professional endorsement. The health insurance is renewed. My savings at the credit union in Limerick sit at approximately 87,000, down from 87,000. The difference being the dental crown. A few setup costs in year 1 that I'd anticipated anyway, and some minor exchange rate movement. The pension comes in every month. The surplus, narrower than it was but still real, goes home every month. The system is intact. Lynn and I are together in the way that people our age are together. No ceremony about it. We didn't have a conversation where we decided to be something. We just gradually became a fact, the way things do when nobody's forcing them. She has not asked me for money. I have not given her any. I helped her son Koi with an English essay in January. He's preparing for university entrance exams, and his written English is functional, but his argumentative structure needs work. I read it and gave him notes the same way I'd give notes to a junior chef on a dish that was almost right. He received this with what Lynn described later as grudging respect, which she found funny and which I found enormously pleasing. I have met him 3 times total, the 3rd time he made eye contact when he shook my hand, which Lynn says is his version of high praise. I haven't given Koi money either. I want to be clear about that. The essay was appropriate. Money would not have been. Now, I want to talk to someone specific for a moment. I want to talk to the person watching this at 2 in the morning from a house that's too quiet. You know who you are. You've got a pension figure open in a spreadsheet somewhere, or you're about to open one, and you're watching this the way I watched that fella from Bristol in the Han River Market in late 2021. Running the numbers. Seeing if they hold. Here's what I'd tell you, and I'd tell you it plainly because I think you deserve that. The numbers can hold. I'm living evidence of that. But the numbers you build now are not the numbers you'll be living in 2 years. Costs move, and your spreadsheet needs to move with them. Build in a buffer, and then add another 15% to the buffer. Because something will happen that you didn't account for, and you'd rather it be a dental crown than a financial crisis. Don't put your savings in a Vietnamese account. Don't put property in anyone's name but your own. And as a foreigner, you can't own land here anyway. So think very carefully before you build anything on anyone else's. Don't make financial decisions when you're in an emotional state, which is to say, don't make financial decisions in the first 6 months of knowing someone, because you are in an emotional state whether you're aware of it or not. Meet the culture properly, read about it, ask questions. Don't arrive with a fantasy version of Vietnam and then be surprised when the actual country is more complicated. And be honest with yourself about what you're running from. Because whatever it is, it comes with you. It will be in the apartment with you. It comes with you. It will be in the apartment with you in Da Nang. It will be there on a Wednesday morning when the market is done and the coffee is finished and there's nothing in particular to do. Vietnam gave me a better version of my days. It didn't repair what was broken before I got here. I want you to understand that distinction before you book a flight. Tehran. That's not peace exactly. It's more like, I've put it somewhere I can still see it, but it's not in the middle of the room anymore. Da Nang didn't do that for me. Time did that, and the distance helped time do it faster. I want to close with something from the kitchen, because it's the only language I've ever really trusted. In professional cooking, there's a term, mise en place. It's French. It means everything in its place. It's what you do before service starts, before the orders come in, before the heat comes on, before anything is required of you. You get everything ready. You know where every ingredient is. You know what goes in which dish and in what order and at what temperature. You have thought through every failure point and you have a plan for it. The reason mise en place matters is that once service starts, you cannot improvise successfully. You cannot decide in the middle of a busy service that you don't know where the salt is. The pressure is too high and the decisions are too fast, and if you haven't prepared, you will fail visibly, in front of everyone, in ways that are very difficult to recover from. Nobody does mise en place for their retirement, nobody. They research the destination, they look at the cost of living, they watch the YouTube videos, but they don't do the actual preparation, the honest accounting of what they need versus what they want, the real budget with the real buffer, the understanding of the culture they're entering and the genuine risks it contains. They improvise. And improvising on a busy service is how you end up in the disaster videos. I came to Da Nang with everything in its place, not perfectly. There were things I didn't know and things I handled poorly, and the visa situation is still a problem I haven't fully solved. But the foundations were there before the heat came on. That's the only reason this went the way it did. The heat always comes on. That's not a warning. That's just the nature of a kitchen. That's Declan. 61 years old, 2 years and change in Da Nang, savings largely intact, pension arriving on schedule, a woman he trusts and 3 friends he'd call real ones, a market he knows well enough that the vendors know him back. Not a fairy tale, know him back. Not a disaster. Something in between that he built carefully, the only way he knew how. If you're sitting somewhere tonight wondering whether something like this is possible for someone like you, the answer is probably yes, but only if you're willing to do the preparation before you go. The people who make it work here aren't luckier than the people who don't. They're more honest with themselves about what they're getting into, and they respect what Vietnam actually is rather than what they need it to be. If you've got a story of your own and you'd like to share it with us at Inside Vietnam, reach out through the links below. New stories come out every week. We're grateful you're here. Until next time, keep your eyes open out there.